where did this, Prairie Striders, or where did it all start with running and having this passion?
Many of the runners in town started doing their shuffling and running prior to the organization of the club. There's no question about that. I can remember a lot of people, and I could call them by name, that were jogging around Brookings in the late 60s, probably 67, 68, 69. People like Dr. Scotty Roberts was one of them, and I started in 68 as well, and the high school, Russ Strandy, the high school coach, was doing some jogging too, and we would run into each other in the neighborhoods. We'd run in the early mornings, and once in a while we'd run a few blocks together. Well, the coach at that time was Jay Dirksen, and that he was a extremely positive person that encouraged this running and jogging because he was doing it himself. And of course he was doing it at a different level. He was extremely good, and his specialty was the marathon, and his plan was to get himself in shape where he could qualify for the Olympic team, like in I think that year probably would have been 68, and so he suggested that all of these people that were running by themselves around neighborhoods in Brookings, there were enough of them we could probably establish a running club. And I'm sure he would have been the main impetus to the beginning of the Prairie Strider Running Club. And this would have been in the fall of 1969, why we actually met in the basement of the barn and organized the club. And we tried to encourage people from several different age groups and disciplines, like Russ Strandy was there at the initial meeting, and he was the track coach at the high school. And he suggested that Roger Berger's son was on the team at that time, so he suggested a team player should come to the meeting and represent the high school running team. And so we also had then assistants, coaches from Jay's time, and he always had a grad assistant, and that grad assistant was at the meeting. Scotty Roberts was at the initial meeting, and I was too, and we were pretty fired up about it. At that time, there wasn't much in the way of books and magazines, so we just had to kind of lean on our two coaches, Strandy and Dirksen, for advice on this new running craze that was sweeping the nation and included Brookings. So that's how the club got off the ground, and we elected officers and plunged full bore into it, and we the next year after the winter was over, why we had meetings every couple of weeks and organized and decided we would have a slate of races at different distances, and we tried to cover all of the metric distances, and in a few years we put on races, hosted races in Brookings, South Dakota that covered every metric distance. Before the 70s were over, why we had 5Ks, 8Ks, 10Ks, 15Ks, 20Ks, 30, 25Ks, 30Ks, marathons, and we were fortunate in having people that were that liked to do things right, and we certified all of the courses in Brookings that we hosted races. We felt it was important that runners knew how far they had gone when they finished one of our races. If it was a 5K, they had run 5K, and we had at one time 13 certified courses in Brookings, South Dakota. To compare that to someone, at the same time, the whole state of Minnesota had 3 courses certified. They had Grandma's Marathon, the Twin City Marathon, and one other road race. I don't know if it was probably a 10K, but they only had 3 certified courses in the whole state of South Dakota compared to our 13. So we kind of took pride in those things, and I think justifiably so. So the club just expanded from those early days in the 70s and kept getting more new members. We didn't have the publications until Runner's World started, and that was the first publication that covered many running subjects, and it started in 1970, and we were subscribers, and it turned out that we picked the right magazine, because a year later, in 1971, they ran a full-page ad, and it said that they needed to acquire more subscribers to their magazines so that they could sell more advertising. And of course, that's the way that game works. And so they offered a lifetime subscription to the Runner's World magazine in 1971 for $75. And of course, we grabbed onto it like a largemouth bass in one of the Minnesota lakes. And after 5-6 years, we've had free Runner's World magazines. So we began accumulating those magazines. And at that time, we had our headquarters were down in downtown Brookings in the basement of a furniture store. And we had, because of the furniture store, we had shelving, because the furniture store sold bookshelves. So we kept getting these magazines every month, and pretty soon we had a shelf full of Runner's World magazines. And it wasn't too long after Runner's World that Running Times showed up on the scene. Jay Dirksen had supplied us with his used copies of Track and Field News. So all of a sudden we had 3 magazines on our bookshelves down in the basement of the furniture store. Well, it occurred to me that we should put these issues to some use, and that the members now, our membership was exploding, mainly because of our dues. We used a low overhead form of dues structure. Our dues initially were $1 a year. Well, I happened to be the treasurer, the initial treasurer of the club, and we found out that everybody would join a club for $1. So our membership just exploded. And it wasn't long before we had hundreds of members. Well, as the treasurer, I became concerned because computers really weren't very popular in the 70s, and so everything was handwritten. And when it came time to send out the dues notice to 900 members, it got to be quite a project. So we had to call in a lot of members and have an assembly line production of the envelopes and the stamping and all of that. So the board met, and they increased the dues to $2. Well, that worked out really quite well from the treasurer's standpoint, because our membership dropped automatically to 450 people, but we got the same money in. So we, for the treasurer's standpoint, why, we accomplished our goal. And then a year later, we went to $3, and we kept our membership up in the 400 or 500 range, and everybody was happy, and life was good. So we ended up with our highest dues being $5, and we had that in the late 70s. We were up to $5, and our membership had leveled off at 300-400 members, and everyone liked it. They liked everything about the club, the races we put on, and it just it was just a good situation. So that's kind of the early history of the Prairie Strider organization. We had no problems conducting races. We were off on the ground floor for this part of the country. It wasn't until the late 70s, meaning 77, 78, why other major cities got into the road race business, and areas like Lincoln, Nebraska put on a race called Statehood Days, and it was a 10-miler, and they did a fabulous job with it. At about the same time, Ames, Iowa came up with Midnight Madness in the late 70s, and our people would go to those races, and they would see the level of the runners that came to those major races, particularly the two I just mentioned, and they thought we should have a racing teams. So we evolved into having racing teams. Well, Brookings, South Dakota, we didn't have enough good runners to have competitive racing teams early on. So we had our track and field and cross country kids from SDSU, those that stuck around in the summer, but and they were good, but we needed to recruit area runners we could see so that we could win. And because these other towns, they were putting on prize money races at the time. So the late 70s and the early 80s, we concentrated on improving our level of running abilities, and we did that. However, we extended our recruiting areas, and many of our top runners were from the area, and we would meet them at road races that were competitive, and sell them on joining the Prairie Strider racing teams. So we started out with open men and open women, period. There wasn't such a thing then as masters running or grandmasters running, but we evolved to that. And when we were at our peak in race teams, probably in the late 80s, we had open men, masters men, grandmasters men. The same thing with the women's team. We had all the bases covered, and we could go anywhere in the Midwest and win, and we did. One year we went to Midnight Madness, and they only had the 10K road race, but we won all 6 races with our racing teams. We took $1,200 out of Ames, Iowa, and of course our runners got 80% of what they won, and the club got 20%, and the runners loved it. They didn't ask for much in those days. If they could get their entry fee waived, a little gas money, and 4 in a motel room, why, they were happy. And the Prairie Striders were one of the most feared racing teams in the Midwest.